Okay, so I'm gonna make the Vermont sourdough bread from the book. I just want to demonstrate how to do that by hand because most of you will be doing it by hand when you're at home. Um, so right now I have mise en place, everything, that flour that is required. This is a mixture of rye and bread flour. I just mix them together in a container. This is the amount of water that's required in the recipe, the salt, and then the sourdough culture that is refreshed from yesterday. So to make it by hand, and you should follow this method. This is the amount of water that's required in the recipe. I generally put about 2/3 of the water already into the bowl that I'm gonna mix my flour in. Then I'm gonna put all the flour that's required in the recipe into that bowl. And then use my hand to slowly mix. And then I'm gonna use the remaining water and put in the container that has my sourdough culture just to loosen up the culture. You don't have to put it all in, the water in, just enough to sort of wash the sourdough off the side of the bowl, the container, so that it can come out more easily into the flour mixture. Okay. I try to get as much as I can out of the bowl. Then I'm going to put the remaining amount of water in here. And now I'm just going to use my hand to just go into the middle, and then I'm going to fold. If you make pasta, just basically fold the edges in and then use my hand to stir the entire mixture together. So it's best to do it, use your hand, so don't try to use a spatula to do it, because in bread making the most important part is being able to feel your dough to know whether or not you should add more water or add more flour because the dough is firm. So now it looks like most of the flours are in, except there's still some left over on the bottom, and my hand tells me that there's still a lot of liquid in here that is not yet absorbed by the flour. So I'm just going to keep kneading this mixture until I can get most of it together. But don't be stubborn and just keep kneading, because you may actually need more liquid. So that's why I always have a small amount of water in a separate bowl alongside, so that I can add it. So now the dough is coming together a little more, but it's getting a little firm. And the other thing is that I have purposely withheld the salt in the mixer. So the salt has to go in also near the end. So the reason we do not put salt in with the flour in the beginning is that salt can inhibit yeast activity. So in the beginning, we want the yeast, which is in a sourdough culture, to be working actively. So we don't want to put the salt in the beginning. But now, as you can see, the dough is gathering up more flour and there's hardly any left over. And the dough actually feels a little firm, but still kneadable. So this is the time I'm going to put the salt in, sprinkle in around and fold it around so that you're not putting it all in one spot. And then knead the salt into the dough. Now as I knead, the dough becomes more cohesive and a little firmer, but still not stiff. And when I'm kneading, what I'm feeling is how firm the dough is, where the wet spots are, so that I can target the area that are wet and try to incorporate more flour in there. Right now, I'm kneading, but I'm also feeling for the salt crystal that are on the surface. So I'm purposely trying to get the salt into the dough. Okay, so note, I'm still keeping my dough inside the bowl so that I don't need to put it on the counter. And I'm not putting extra flour into the mixture yet. And based on my feeling of the dough, my conclusion is that I don't think I need extra water. Note the dough is soft. Okay, it feels moist in my hand. So that's why you should always use your hand, because your hand can tell you about the condition of your dough. So right now my hand is able to squeeze it. It feels moist. It's not really sticky. So here's my clean hand. I can touch it and it's not sticking to my hand. That's what you're looking for. But if you use a hand that's dirty or sticky with flour, there's greater chance of flour from the dough from your dough ball sticking to your hand. You think it's sticky, when in fact it isn't. Right now, to me, the dough feels very moist, is pliable, and so I said I don't think I need more flour, and I don't think I need more liquid. So what I'm gonna do is just keep working the dough until I have a somewhat smooth dough ball. And when I'm kneading, what I'm feeling is are there dry spots. If there's dry spot, I try to work it inside the dough. So I know traditionally you would be kneading it forever, at least for 4 or 5 minutes by hand. But in the artisan method, the less handling of the dough, the better in the beginning. So this dough is now cohesive, but it's certainly not smooth. And if you test it for window pane, which is the characteristic method to determine whether there's enough gluten development, you see that it's not forming a window pane. But I'm not concerned, because while this dough is resting or fermenting, I will develop more gluten by manually stretching the dough out. So now the dough is formed, then what you can do is get a new bowl or scrape this bowl out and lightly grease it with fat. You can do a little bit of olive oil, canola oil. If you were in our kitchen, you would do pan spray, and put your dough upside down directly back on it. Then what you want to do next is cover it. Generally, at home, I would recommend a dish towel and then a plastic wrap over it. You let it sit for about 30 minutes, and then after 30 minutes done, what you want to do is take the dough out of the bowl, put it on a lightly greased, lightly floured surface, and stretch it out. So obviously, this dough has not got 30 minutes of rest, so it's resisting me from stretching it. So, but if it was sitting for about 30 minutes, this dough will be relaxed and I can easily stretch it out. So pretend it's been 30 minutes, and now you want to do a process called stretch and fold, which means stretch your dough out to a rectangle of approximately equal thickness, and then all you do is fold the dough out back like you're doing a letter, turn it over, fold it just like that. So this is called a fold. So if you do this stretch and fold process every 30 minutes for the next hour and a half. So do stretch and fold 3 times. When you do that, you're developing more gluten to your dough, and by the time you did your 3rd stretch, your dough would be fully developed and has the window pane that you're looking for. So when that is done, then you can let it rest for 20 minutes or so, and then you can portion and shape your dough into whatever shape that you want. All right, so that's basically how to make dough by hand and by the artisan bread method with our machine. I would recommend that for most of the bread in this class, you do use your hand to mix your dough, except when we get to the rich dough area. So I would let this rest and then stretch and fold in another 30 minutes. Let it rest, stretch and fold in another 30 minutes. Then let it rest for 20 and then portion and shape. I'm just saying, let's pretend now.
I already started it, but I can
Okay,
this part.
so it's 30 minutes since the last time I made the dough, so now it's time for me to do what we call stretch and fold, which is to put more gluten into the dough. So this is the dough that's been resting, so what I'm gonna do is first take a little flour and then broadcast it onto the bench. That's more than you need. Then you're gonna use this plastic grain scraper to help you lift the dough out of the bowl. So, and turn it upside down. So now the dough is much more relaxed, pliable. So what you want to do is just basically stretch your dough into a slight rectangle. You don't need to get it really big or anything. This is fine. And then what all you do is fold it over, brush off excess flour that's on top, fold the top onto the other half, and then turn it 90 degrees and fold it sort of like burrito-ish. So now you did what we call a stretch and fold. And if you can get closer, you know what you notice is that the bread dough now is much smoother, tighter looking than when we first started. So now this goes back into the bowl, upside down, and then you're gonna cover it again and just let it sit on the counter for another 30 minutes. And then when the other 30 minutes is up, you do exactly what I just demonstrated and do another stretch and fold, put it back in the bowl, let it go for another 30 minutes. Okay, so that's what a stretch and fold is. And every time you do a stretch and fold, the dough's gluten develop more, and then your dough become more smooth over time. Like if you can see, this is much smoother than the beginning. All right.